The scent of ruin wasn't sulphur and brimstone, as the poets claimed. It was the smell of damp parchment and cheap tallow candles, the scent of her father's study, where he'd signed away their fortune, their name, their very future. For Paisley de Valois, it was the taste of cold tea and colder pity in the eyes of former friends. Now standing before the most powerful man in England, a man whose face was carved from granite and whose heart was said to be even harder, she was presented with a choice: complete social oblivion or a gilded cage. He called it marriage. She knew it for what it was: a sail. The London fog, thick as woolen blankets and tasting of coal smoke, seemed to seep through the very walls of the modest townhouse the de Valois family now called home. It was a pathetic echo of their once grand Belgravia mansion, a place of echoing rooms and ghosts of laughter from a life that felt like another woman's story. For Paisley, the fog was a shroud, mirroring the obscurity that had fallen upon her house. Her father, Baron de Valois, once a confidant of ministers and a titan of finance, was now a hollowed-out man. A single disastrous investment in South American railways, guided by treacherous advice, had shattered his empire. Whispers of treason, baseless but sticky as tar, had followed, ensuring no one would extend a hand to help. They were lepers to the ton. Paisley clutched the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she waited in the drawing room. The air was thick with the tension of a final, desperate gambit. A visitor was expected. Not a creditor, for they had stopped being polite long ago, but a potential savior, though the word felt like ash in her mouth. The butler, their last remaining servant, announced him with a tremor in his voice. His Grace, the Duke of Ardmore. Dawson Turner, the Duke of Ardmore, entered the room not with a stride, but with a presence that seemed to suck the very air from it. He was a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, impossibly wealthy, ruthlessly intelligent, and utterly remote. He was not handsome in the poetic sense. His features were too severe, his jaw too resolute, his grey eyes too piercing. They were the eyes of a predator, a man who saw the world as a series of problems to be solved or obstacles to be crushed. And today, the de Valois family was a problem he intended to solve. He wasted no time on pleasantries, his gaze sweeping over the room's faded grandeur before settling on Paisley. It was a look of assessment, cool and unnervingly thorough, as if he were judging horseflesh. "Mr. Valois," he said, his voice a low baritone that resonated with command. "Your father has explained your predicament." "My family's predicament, Your Grace," Paisley corrected, her chin lifting. Pride was all she had left. "It is a burden we all share." A flicker of something, was it respect, crossed his face before it was gone. "A burden I propose to alleviate. I have an offer for you, a marriage contract." The words hung in the air, stark and transactional. This was no courtship. This was a merger. "You require a duchess," Paisley stated, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "A wife of suitable lineage to host your parties and produce an heir." "Precisely," the Duke confirmed, his bluntness a cold slap. "You possess the name, the breeding, and the education. Your family's current. Difficulties make you an advantageous choice. You will not come to the marriage with expectations of sentiment." "And in return?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I will settle your father's entire debt, every last shilling. I will restore his accounts and use my influence to silence the ridiculous rumors of treason. The name de Valois will be cleansed. Your father will be able to hold his head up in his club again. Your family will be secure." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. You will trade your name for my protection and my fortune. It will be a marriage for all public appearances. In private, we shall lead separate lives. Your duties will be to manage my household, to be a companion to my sister, and to uphold the dignity of the Turner name. Nothing more will be asked of you. Nothing more will be offered. It was a cage, she thought again, but one lined with silk and gold. The alternative was a debtor's prison for her father, and a life of destitution for herself, perhaps as a governess, forever pitied and scorned. She looked at her father, who stood by the fireplace, a man broken by shame, and she saw her answer. She would not let him be destroyed. You speak of your sister, Your Grace, Paisley said, deflecting for a moment. Lady Annalise? Annalise is of a delicate constitution. She will be making her debut in society next season, and she requires a steady, respectable female presence to guide her. My mother passed years ago. You will fulfill that role. It was another duty, another chain in the agreement, a fragile, sickly sister-in-law to manage. Paisley took a deep breath, the scent of decay and desperation filling her lungs one last time. I have one condition, she said, surprising even herself with her audacity. The Duke's eyebrow arched, a minute gesture that nonetheless conveyed immense surprise. You are in no position to be making conditions. Nevertheless, she insisted, her gaze unwavering. My pianoforte. It was my mother's. It is the only thing of value we have left that the creditors have not yet seized. I wish for it to be moved to Ardmore House. For the first time, an emotion she couldn't decipher flickered in his grey eyes. He considered her for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was taut with tension. He was a man of power, used to dictating terms, not accepting them. But this small request, this one link to her past, was a piece of her soul she refused to sell. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Very well. Your pianoforte will be moved. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Valois? She looked away from his penetrating gaze toward the grimy window where the London fog pressed in, and saw not a cage, but an escape from poverty, from shame, from pity, an escape into a different kind of prison. We have an agreement, Your Grace, she replied, her voice the tolling of a bell for the life she once knew. Ardmore House on Park Lane was not a home. It was a monument, a sprawling edifice of pale Portland stone. It stood as a testament to the Turner family's centuries of accumulated wealth and power. To Paisley, newly minted as the Duchess of Ardmore, it felt as cold and imposing as a mausoleum. Her first weeks as Dawson's wife were a blur of bewildered loneliness. The marriage ceremony had been a private, sterile affair at St. George's, Hanover Square, attended by only a handful of necessary witnesses. There was no celebration, no wedding tour. She was simply installed in her new residence, given a tour of the vast wings and endless rooms by a stiffly formal housekeeper, and then left to her own devices. Her chambers, a suite of rooms in the East Wing, were opulent beyond belief, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with silks from China and furniture from the finest French artisans. Yet they were entirely separate from the Duke's own apartments in the West Wing. As he had promised, their lives were to be separate. They met at dinner, where they would exchange clipped, formal pleasantries over 7 courses, often with his solicitor or estate manager present. He was unfailingly polite, yet his distance was a physical barrier, a wall of ice she could not penetrate. The Tun was abuzz with the news of the sudden marriage. Speculation was rampant. Most concluded the powerful Duke of Ardmore had bought himself a titled, beautiful, but penniless bride to polish his ducal coronet. Paisley felt their stares at the opera heard their whispers behind their fans at afternoon teas. They saw her as an acquisition, a pretty bauble the Duke had purchased. The pity they once showed her had curdled into a new kind of contempt, mixed with envy. Her one solace was the pianoforte. It had been placed, as requested, in a small, sun-drenched morning room overlooking a private garden. It was a magnificent Pleyel grand, and its familiar ivory keys were the only friends she had in this cold, gilded cage. Here she could pour out the turmoil in her heart, her fingers flying across the keys in a passionate torrent of Chopin, or finding a melancholic peace in the nocturnes of John Field. It was during one of these sessions that she first truly met Anneliese Turner. Paisley had been so lost in a particularly tempestuous polonaise that she hadn't heard the door open. When the final, crashing chord faded, a soft, hesitant voice spoke from the doorway. That was breathtaking. Paisley turned, startled. A young woman stood there, frail and ethereal, with large, luminous eyes and hair the color of spun moonlight. She was clutching a book to her chest like a shield. This was Lady Anneliese. "Lady Anneliese," Paisley said, rising from the bench. "Forgive me. I did not hear you enter. Please, you must call me Anneliese, and you must not stop. I have never heard anyone play with such feeling." The girl drifted into the room, her eyes fixed on the piano. "Dawson said you were accomplished, but he did not say you were a master." The mention of her husband sent a familiar chill through Paisley. His Grace and I do not often speak of such things. Annaliese's gaze was perceptive, far more so than her fragile appearance suggested. "Dawson doesn't speak of anything," she said with a wry smile. "He communicates through decrees and bank drafts, but he listens. I've seen him stand in the hall sometimes when you play." This revelation sent a strange jolt through Paisley. The idea of that cold, imposing man pausing to listen to her music was as startling as it was unbelievable. From that day, a tentative friendship blossomed between the two women. Anneliese was not the sickly invalid Paisley had imagined. While her health was delicate, her mind was sharp and her spirit yearned for more than her sheltered life allowed. She was fascinated by Paisley's knowledge of art and literature, and Paisley found in Anneliese a bright, receptive companion who saw beyond the Duchess and the scandal. Their growing bond, however, did not go unnoticed, and it brought Paisley into the orbit of others who frequented Ardmore House, including those who saw her as an unwelcome interloper. One afternoon, as she and Anneliese were taking tea in the conservatory, they were joined by Lord Percival Crewe. Crewe was a distant cousin of the Turners, a man whose polished manners and fashionable attire barely concealed a cruel, calculating nature. He had been one of the first to abandon the de Valois family after their fall, his prior flattery turning to open scorn. "Your Grace," he said, bowing low over Paisley's hand, his lips lingering a moment too long. "And dear Anneliese, I find you both looking radiant." His eyes, the colour of muddy water, slid to Paisley. "The country air of Ardmore House seems to agree with you, Duchess. A vast improvement over your previous circumstances, I'm sure." The veiled insult was unmistakable. Anneliese stiffened beside her. Paisley withdrew her hand, her expression serene. "Indeed, Lord Crewe, security and stability are blessings one should never take for granted. I am sure you understand that better than anyone." His smile tightened. He had always been a man who lived on the edge of his means, a social parasite clinging to his wealthier relations. Her polite barb had found its mark. "Still as sharp-tongued as ever," he murmured, his voice losing its silken edge. "A word of advice, Duchess. The Turner name is ancient and revered. It would be a tragedy if it were to be tarnished by any lingering shadows from another family's disgrace." It was a threat, plain and simple. He was reminding her of her vulnerability, of the precariousness of her position. She was the Duchess, but she was still, in his eyes and the eyes of many, the daughter of a ruined man. "The only shadows I see, my lord," Paisley said, her voice like ice, "are the ones cast by those with foul intentions. Ardmore House has a great many windows. We let in the light here." Lord Crewe's face darkened, but before he could retort, the Duke's voice cut through the tension from the doorway. "Crewe, I was not aware you were calling today." Dawson stood there, his presence immediately dominating the space. He had not raised his voice, but the effect was chilling. Lord Crewe paled and stammered, offering a hasty excuse about paying his respects. The Duke's gaze moved from Crewe to Paisley, a question in their depths. He had heard. He had seen. But he said nothing. He simply escorted Crewe from the room, his hand on the man's elbow, a clear, non-negotiable dismissal. Paisley was left with the dregs of her tea and the cold knot of fear in her stomach. Lord Crewe hated her, and a man like that, a man with nothing to lose and a venomous heart, was a dangerous enemy to have in a world built on appearances. The threat implicit in Lord Crewe's visit soon blossomed into a subtle but relentless campaign against her. It began as whispers, insidious as smoke, curling into the drawing rooms and ballrooms of London. At a soirée hosted by the Countess of Danbury, Paisley overheard two ladies discussing her unseemly haste in marrying the Duke, implying she had trapped him to save her family. At another, a gentleman made a pointed remark about the instability of French blood, a clear jab at her de Valois heritage. Each slight was a paper cut, small and stinging, but they were beginning to bleed her confidence dry. She maintained a flawless facade of ducal dignity, her back straight, her smile serene, but inside, the lonely, shamed girl from the little townhouse in Bloomsbury was trembling. Her husband remained a frustrating enigma. He saw the snubs. She was certain of it. She caught his eyes narrowing when Lady Jersey turned her back on her, or the tightening of his jaw when a lord made a snide comment just within earshot. Yet he never spoke of it. He offered no words of comfort, no reassurances. His silence was a breeding ground for her deepest insecurities. Did he regret his bargain? Did he believe the whispers himself? The only warmth in her life was her friendship with Annalise. The two had become inseparable. They practiced their French, read poetry aloud, and Paisley began teaching Annalise the basics of the pianoforte. In Annalise's bright, unassuming company, Paisley could almost forget she was a duchess on public display. One afternoon, seeking respite from the oppressive social calendar, they rode out in Hyde Park. It was a rare, beautiful day, and the park was crowded with the fashionable elite. As they trotted along Rotten Row, they passed Lord Crewe, riding with a cadre of his cronies. He tipped his hat with exaggerated flair. "Your Grace," he called out, his voice carrying clearly. "I was just telling my friends how fortunate the Duke is to find a wife so resilient. Many a woman would crumble under such a dramatic reversal of fortune. It shows a certain hardy constitution." The word hardy was meant to sound common, coarse. It was an insult wrapped in a compliment. Before Paisley could formulate a reply, Annalise spoke up, her voice clear and surprisingly firm. "My brother is indeed fortunate, Lord Crewe. He chose a duchess of intelligence, grace, and impeccable character, qualities that seemed to be in tragically short supply among some of his acquaintances." Crewe's face mottled with fury at being publicly rebuked by a girl he considered a fragile non-entity. He bowed stiffly and spurred his horse on, his friends snickering behind him. Paisley looked at her sister-in-law with astonishment and gratitude. "Annalise, thank you. Annalise squeezed her hand. "He is a horrid man. I will not have him speak to you that way. You are my sister now." That simple declaration, "You are my sister," meant more to Paisley than all the jewels and titles the Duke had bestowed upon her. It was a promise of loyalty, a small shield against the world. But Lord Crewe was not so easily deterred. His attacks grew more personal, more venomous. The whispers he seeded began to coalesce into a truly vicious rumour. He started hinting that Paisley's father's ruin was not due to a mere bad investment, but to an addiction to gambling. He painted a picture of a desperate man who had sold his own daughter to the highest bidder to cover his shameful debts. This lie was particularly cruel because it contained a kernel of truth. Her father had sold her, in a manner of speaking. The fabrication twisted their tragedy into something sordid and cheap. The true test of her endurance came with the announcement of the annual Turner Masquerade. It was the premier event of the London season, a lavish affair that solidified the Duke of Ardmore's place at the apex of society. As the new Duchess, Paisley would be the hostess. It would be her official debut, her trial by fire. The entire ton would be there, watching, judging. In the week leading up to the ball, her anxiety mounted. She oversaw the preparations with meticulous care, determined that no one would find any fault in her duties. The menus were chosen, the floral arrangements from the Ardmore country estate were planned, and the orchestra was booked. But with every detail she finalized, the knot of dread in her stomach tightened. 2 nights before the ball, she was in the music room, her fingers stumbling over a simple nocturne, her mind too preoccupied to focus. The door opened, and the Duke entered. It was late, and it was the first time he had ever sought her out in her sanctuary. "Your playing is agitated," he observed, standing in the shadows by the door. "My apologies if I disturbed you, Your Grace," she said, her hands falling silent on the keys. "You did not disturb me." He walked further into the room, his formidable presence seeming to shrink the space. "The preparations for the masquerade are complete?" "They are. You seem unwell." It was the closest he had ever come to an expression of personal concern, and it startled her. The question hung in the air, a silent invitation to confide in him. For a fleeting moment, she yearned to tell him everything, about the whispers, about Crewe's malice, about the crushing weight of his silence. She wanted to scream at him, to ask him why he wouldn't defend her, why he treated her like a stranger under his own roof. But the habit of pride was too strong. The terms of their bargain were too clear. No sentiment. Separate lives. "I am merely tired, Your Grace," she said, her voice a perfect mask of polite indifference. Hosting an event of this magnitude is a significant undertaking. He watched her for a long, unreadable moment. His grey eyes seemed to search for something behind her carefully constructed facade. She felt stripped bare under his gaze, yet she held it, refusing to look away. "Indeed," he finally said, his voice flat. "See that you are sufficiently rested. I expect my Duchess to be flawless on Saturday evening." He turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut, leaving Paisley alone with the echo of his cold, demanding words. Flawless. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a performance. A perfect, polished Duchess to reflect his perfect, polished world. She turned back to the piano but did not play. She simply stared at the reflection of her face in the polished black wood. A stranger in a strange house, bracing herself for the coming storm. The night of the Turner Masquerade arrived, draped in a deceptive cloak of splendor. Ardmore House was transformed. Thousands of candles glittered in crystal chandeliers, their light dancing off gilded mirrors and the polished marble floors of the grand ballroom. The air was heavy with the scent of hothouse roses and expensive perfume. An orchestra played a vibrant waltz from a flower-decked alcove, the music a cheerful counterpoint to the anxiety thrumming in Paisley's veins. She stood beside her husband in the receiving line at the top of the grand staircase, a vision of ducal perfection. Her gown was a masterpiece of shimmering silver silk and the famous Turner diamonds, a king's ransom of ice and fire, encircled her throat and glittered in her upswept dark hair. A delicate silver mask, shaped like a filigree butterfly, concealed the upper half of her face, but it could not hide the tension in her jaw or the shadows of apprehension in her eyes. Dawson was magnificent beside her, dressed in severe black evening wear that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders. His mask was simple black domino, doing little to soften the forbidding austerity of his expression. To the world, they were a picture of power and elegance, the Duke and his beautiful new Duchess. As the cream of London society flowed past them, their faces hidden behind masks of velvet, silk and feathers, Paisley felt 1,000 eyes on her. The compliments on the ball's magnificence were endless, but she could feel the insincerity, the avid curiosity just beneath the surface. They were all waiting for the purchased bride to make a misstep. Lord Crewe arrived late, a deliberate act to ensure a grand entrance. He wore the guise of a Venetian nobleman, his mask a cruel, long-nosed affair that seemed to mock his own beak-like features. He bowed low before Paisley, his eyes glittering with malice. "A triumph, Your Grace," he purred. "You have truly outdone yourself. One would almost think you were born to this life, rather than acquired for it." Dawson's hand, resting on the small of Paisley's back, tensed almost imperceptibly. It was the only sign that he had heard. "We are all playing roles tonight, are we not, Lord Crewe?" Paisley replied, her voice cool. "It is a masquerade, after all, the perfect occasion for masks to slip." Crewe's smile was a predatory slash. "Indeed. I imagine some masks are more fragile than others." He moved on, melting into the throng, and Paisley let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dawson's hand remained on her back, a warm, solid pressure that was both a comfort and a source of confusion. He had offered no defense, but his silent physical support was a strange, new language between them. Annalise, dressed as a woodland nymph in pale green silk, her face alight with excitement, soon drew Paisley away to admire the decorations in the supper room. For a while, Paisley allowed herself to be distracted by her sister-in-law's innocent joy, the dark premonition in her heart receding slightly. But the storm was gathering. She began to notice small, orchestrated moments of humiliation. A footman, clearly bribed, accidentally spilled a drop of red wine on the hem of her silver gown. A dowager countess loudly lamented the changing standards of the great houses, her eyes fixed on Paisley. These were Crewe's fingerprints, she knew, small acts of sabotage designed to unnerve her. The true assault began after supper. The orchestra struck up a new set of waltzes, and the Duke, fulfilling his duty, led Paisley onto the floor for the first dance. As they moved together in perfect, practiced unison, a hush began to fall over the chattering crowd. The whispers started again, louder this time, more focused. People were not watching the dance. They were staring at Paisley, their expressions a mixture of shock, scandal, and gleeful contempt. A cold dread washed over her. "What is it?" she murmured to Dawson, her grip tightening on his shoulder. "What are they saying?" His jaw was a hard line. "Ignore them. Keep dancing." But it was impossible. The whispers grew into a unified, damning chorus. She caught snippets of the same story from all corners of the ballroom. A story of a secret lover. A story of clandestine meetings in a Kensington bookshop. A story of passionate letters signed with her initial G. The rumor, a complete and utter fabrication, was spreading through the room like a contagion. It was perfectly crafted to destroy her. A duchess, barely weeks into her marriage to the most powerful peer in the realm, already taking a lover. It was a scandal of epic proportions, an unforgivable betrayal not just of her husband, but of the entire social order. Her steps faltered. The room began to spin, the glittering lights blurring into streaks of cruel, mocking fire. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the triumphant malice of her unseen enemies. This was it. This was the checkmate Lord Crewe had planned. He hadn't just attacked her, he had attacked the honor of the Duke himself, making it impossible for Dawson to ignore. The waltz ended. They stood isolated in the center of the vast ballroom floor. The orchestra fell silent. The entire assembly of London's elite stared at them, a colosseum of judges waiting for the final verdict. Paisley felt naked, exposed, her mask a useless shield against the hundreds of eyes stripping her bare. She was no longer a duchess. In their eyes, she was a harlot, a disgrace, the ruined daughter of a ruined man who had sullied one of the country's greatest names. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from malice and anticipation. Every eye was fixed on the ducal couple isolated in the center of the floor. Paisley stood frozen, her blood turned to ice. She could feel the stares like physical blows, each one a stone cast in judgment. Her carefully constructed composure was shattering, cracking like fine porcelain under a hammer. She was drowning in a sea of contempt, and the hand of the man beside her, her husband, felt 1,000 miles away. Then, a voice, sharp and triumphant, cut through the silence. It was Lord Crewe. He had positioned himself near the orchestra, ensuring he had the room's full attention. "A touching performance, Your Grace," he called out, his voice dripping with false sympathy as he addressed the Duke. "But perhaps your new Duchess is fatigued. Such social exertions must be taxing, especially when one has so many other engagements to keep." The insinuation was as clear as a declaration of war. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was no longer a whispered rumor, it was a public accusation. Crewe smiled, sensing his victory. He had cornered them. If the Duke defended her, he would look like a cuckolded fool. If he abandoned her, her ruin would be complete, and his own judgment in marrying her would be forever questioned. Paisley's world narrowed to the sneering, long-nosed mask of her tormentor. The diamonds on her neck felt like a leaden yoke. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Her breath hitched in a sob she desperately tried to suppress. This was it. The end. Public humiliation, swift and absolute. She instinctively took a step back, to flee, to run from the glares and the judgment. But Dawson's hand tightened on hers, holding her in place. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading, expecting to see the same cold fury, or worse, disgust that she saw on every other face. But what she saw stunned her into stillness. The Duke's face, under his simple mask, was not one of rage or shame. It was a mask of pure, controlled lethality. His grey eyes were not looking at her, but were fixed on Lord Crewe, and in their depths was a promise of annihilation so profound it made the air crackle. He had been silent, yes. He had been distant. But he had not been oblivious. He had been waiting, watching, and Crewe had just sprung his trap and walked directly into the Duke's. Slowly, deliberately, Dawson's gaze left Crewe and moved across the room, meeting the eyes of the most powerful lords and ladies, the gossiping matriarchs, and the sneering dandies. He held their gazes one by one, a silent act of dominance that commanded their attention and their fear. The room grew so quiet that the faint flicker of the candlewicks could be heard. Then he looked down at Paisley. His expression softened, just for her. The icy fury in his eyes was banked, replaced by something she had never seen before, a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. His other hand came up, his gloved fingers gently touching her cheek, just below her silver butterfly mask. "Paisley," he said, his voice low but carrying with perfect clarity in the cavernous silence. It was the first time he had ever used her given name with such intimacy. It was not a question, not a command. It was an anchor. And then he did something that shattered every expectation, every rule of their cold bargain, and every malicious hope in the room. He lowered his head, and he kissed her. It was not a chaste, husbandly peck on the cheek. It was not a kiss for show. It was a kiss of searing, unapologetic possession. His lips claimed hers with a raw, desperate passion that sent a shockwave through her entire body. It was a kiss that spoke of things their words never had, of frustrated desire, of a shared loneliness, of a desperate, unspoken connection forged in the crucible of their strange union. It was a brand, a claim, a declaration made not with words, but with a fire that stole the breath from her lungs. For a dizzying moment, Paisley forgot the crowd, the scandal, the humiliation. There was only Dawson, the solid strength of his arms pulling her flush against him, the firm, demanding pressure of his mouth on hers, the scent of his skin, the stunning, earth-shattering revelation that this cold, remote man could kiss her with a heat that threatened to melt her bones. He broke the kiss as slowly as he had started it, his forehead resting against hers for a heartbeat. He didn't need to look at the crowd. He could feel their collective shock, their stunned disbelief. Still holding her, he turned his head, his gaze once again finding Lord Crewe, who now looked ashen, his triumphant smirk wiped clean from his face. "My wife," the Duke of Ardmore stated, his voice a blade of glacial steel, "is above reproach. Her honor is my honor. And anyone," he continued, his eyes sweeping the room, leaving no one out of his warning, "who dares to suggest otherwise will answer directly to me. I trust I have made myself perfectly clear." No one moved, no one breathed. He had not simply defended her. He had bound her to him, publicly and irrevocably, with a passion that defied all gossip. He had used their own weapon, public spectacle, against them. The Duchess of Ardmore was not a victim to be pitied or a strumpet to be scorned. She was the cherished, desired wife of the most formidable man in England. The kiss had been his seal upon that truth. He then looked down at Paisley, his expression unreadable but for the lingering fire in his eyes. Without another word, he placed her hand firmly in the crook of his arm, turned his back on the entire assembly, and led her from the ballroom, leaving behind a scene of utter, dumbfounded silence and the complete and total ruin of Lord Percival Crewe. The walk from the ballroom to the Duke's private study was the longest of Paisley's life. The sound of her silver slippers on the marble floors echoed in the cavernous, silent corridors of Ardmore House. Dawson's grip on her arm was firm, a possessive anchor in the swirling vortex of her thoughts. The ghost of his kiss still burned on her lips, a confusing, exhilarating brand. He led her not to her apartments, but to his. The ducal study was a room she had never entered, the heart of his power. It was unapologetically masculine, lined floor to ceiling with books, smelling of old leather, whiskey, and the faint scent of cigar smoke. A fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on a large mahogany desk littered with papers and maps. Dawson closed the heavy oak doors behind them, the sound shutting out the rest of the world. He released her arm and walked over to a decanter, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. Her hand was trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. "Drink it," he commanded, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She took a sip of the brandy. The fiery liquid slid down her throat, chasing away some of the chill that had settled deep in her bones. He watched her, his grey eyes intense under the stark gaslight. The mask was gone, both his and hers, discarded somewhere on their flight from the ballroom. They were simply Dawson and Paisley, for the first time. "Are you all right?" he asked. The simple question, the genuine concern in it, almost broke her. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He took a long swallow from his own glass, his back to the fire. "I apologize," he said, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "I should never have allowed it to get that far. I knew Crew was plotting something. I underestimated his viciousness." Paisley found her voice, though it was raspy, with unshed tears. "You knew? Why didn't you warn me? Why did you let me walk into that slaughter?" "Because," he said, turning to face her fully, "I did not want to warn him that I was watching. Crew is a symptom, not the disease. I needed him to show his hand, to reveal who he was working for." Paisley stared at him, bewildered. "Working for? I thought he simply hated me." "Oh, his personal malice towards you is quite real," Dawson said with a grimace. "He is a petty, resentful creature. But the rumor tonight, its precision, its timing, the way it was seeded so expertly through the crowd, that was not the work of a fool like Crew alone. He is a pawn." He gestured to the chair by the fire. "Sit, Paisley. There is a great deal I must now tell you. The terms of our bargain are officially void." She sank into the worn leather chair, her mind reeling. He paced before the fire, a caged lion, the carefully controlled mask of the Duke, finally stripped away to reveal the man beneath, a man burdened by secrets and engaged in a silent war. "Our marriage was not merely for the sake of appearances, not for me," he began, his voice low and urgent. "Yes, I needed a duchess, and Annalise needed a companion. But there was another reason. I married you, Paisley, because I am investigating the man who ruined your father." The air left her lungs in a rush. "What?" "But the world believes it was a failed railway investment." "The investment was designed to fail," Dawson corrected her. "Your father was deliberately targeted. He was fed false information, his finances systematically dismantled by an enemy he never saw. An enemy with immense power and influence. The same enemy, I believe, who has been working for years to undermine my own family's interests, both financial and political." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "The man's name is Lord Alaric Vernon, the Earl of Blackwater. He is charming, respected, a friend to the Prince Regent himself. And he is a traitor, selling state secrets to the French for personal gain. Your father, with his deep connections in the Ministry of War, learned something he shouldn't have. Vernon couldn't risk exposure, so he destroyed him financially and socially, planting whispers of treason to ensure no one would ever believe him." Paisley felt a wave of dizziness. Lord Blackwater, the affable, silver-haired Earl who had always been so kind to her family. It was impossible. "And Crew?" she whispered. "Crew is in Blackwater's pocket, deep in gambling debt, as you might expect. Blackwater uses him as his attack dog. The campaign against you was never just about spite. It was a strategic move by Blackwater to destabilize me. By humiliating my new wife, he humiliates me. He makes me look weak, foolish. He sought to isolate you, to break you, and through you to gain leverage over me. Everything clicked into place. The coldness, the distance, the silent observation. Dawson hadn't been ignoring her plight. He had been watching the movements of the enemy. Their marriage, his sudden choice of the disgraced Baron de Valois' daughter, had been a calculated move to draw his enemy out. So I was bait, she said, the realization dawning with a bitter taste. No, he said, his voice dropping, taking a step closer to her. You were a risk I took, a risk I have no right to ask you to share. But now you are in the center of it. That kiss. He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. That was not part of the plan. That was a reaction. I could not stand by and watch them destroy you. The memory of the kiss, the raw emotion in it, hung between them. It hadn't been a strategic move. It had been real. Paisley looked at this man, her husband, truly seeing him for the first time. Not as the cold Duke of Ardmore, but as a man fighting a secret war, a man who had, in his own calculating way, tried to protect her family. He had yoked her to his fate without her consent, but he had also, in that ballroom, shielded her with his own body and reputation. The fear and humiliation that had gripped her began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning anger. Not at Dawson, but at the men who had destroyed her father and targeted her. She stood up, her spine straightening, the tremor in her hands gone. My father is a good man, she said, her voice clear and strong. He was made a fool of, and our name was dragged through the mud to cover a traitor's crimes. She looked Dawson straight in the eye. You say our bargain is void, then let us make a new one. You are no longer just my husband by contract, and I am no longer just your duchess for appearance's sake. We are allies. Help me clear my father's name and expose this Lord Blackwater. And I will help you in any way I can. A slow smile, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him, touched Dawson's lips. It transformed his harsh features, making him look younger, less burdened. I was hoping you would say that, Paisley, he said. Blackwater thinks he has targeted a weakness. He is about to discover he has forged a weapon. In the flickering firelight of the Duke's study, surrounded by the secrets of his silent war, the Duchess of Ardmore was reborn. The marriage of convenience was over. A partnership of purpose, and something far more dangerous, had just begun. The aftermath of the masquerade had redrawn the map of their marriage. The cold silence of Ardmore House was replaced by the hushed intensity of a war room, with the Duke's study as its heart. Nightly by the fire's glow, they pieced together the puzzle of Lord Blackwater's treason. Paisley, once a decorative duchess, was now Dawson's most trusted counsel. Dawson laid out maps and shipping manifests, evidence he had been gathering for months. Blackwater uses his legitimate trading company as a front, he explained, his finger tracing a route across the channel. He smuggles French goods in and British secrets out. But the secrets must originate somewhere, Paisley countered, her mind racing. My father's work was with naval procurement at the War Office. He had access to the very information you describe. She looked up, her eyes bright with a terrible understanding. He must have noticed a discrepancy and mentioned it to someone he trusted. He did, Dawson confirmed grimly, to Sir Reginald Pike, Under-Secretary for Naval Affairs, a man I now know to be one of Blackwater's closest confidants. The treachery was breathtaking. Her father had confided in the very man who was part of the conspiracy, sealing his own fate. Men like Pike always have a weakness, Paisley insisted, a vulnerability we can exploit. Dawson's resources quickly uncovered it. A ruinous gambling addiction. And the owner of Sir Reginald's crippling debts was none other than Lord Blackwater himself. Pike wasn't just a conspirator. He was a puppet, his strings pulled by the Earl. They had the motive and the method, but they needed irrefutable proof to bring before the Crown, something more than whispers and circumstance. The opportunity arrived with an embossed invitation, Lord Blackwater's annual midsummer gala at his country estate. "He will feel untouchable," Dawson surmised, his voice low. "He believes he has won. His guard will be down." The objective was simple, the execution perilous. While attending the gala, Paisley would slip away to search Blackwater's private study for the physical proof they needed. Dawson, meanwhile, would host a high-stakes card game, a glittering distraction to keep Blackwater and his cronies, including Pike, occupied. On the night of the gala, Paisley felt a tremor of fear beneath her confident facade. She wore a gown of daring crimson, a stark contrast to the silver she had worn on the night of her humiliation. As their carriage swept up the long drive to Blackwater Manor, Dawson reached across the plush interior and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady. "Stay close," he said, his voice a low command. "At the first sign of trouble, I will come for you." The promise was a shield, the unspoken affection in his eyes, a newfound strength. Lord Blackwater greeted them with a predator's smile. "Your Grace, and the Duchess. So glad you could attend. It does one good to see falsehoods put so firmly in their place." "Indeed, my lord," Paisley replied, her voice smooth as ice. "Truth has a way of revealing itself, often when one least expects it." An hour later, the plan was in motion. Dawson had Blackwater, Pike, and several other lords engrossed in a game of whist, the pile of gold on the table commanding their full attention. Feigning a headache, Paisley slipped from the sweltering ballroom onto a cool, dark terrace. She navigated the shadows of the manor, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was no longer just a duchess playing a role. She was an agent of justice, risking everything for her family's name. Using a hairpin, a skill learned from a novel and perfected in secret, she picked the lock on the library's terrace door and slid inside. The Earl's study, and the secrets it held, were just a few feet away. The Earl of Blackwater's study was the heart of his web, a dark, oak-panelled room smelling of deceit. Paisley ignored the trappings of power, moving directly to the massive desk. Her fingers traced the ornate carvings, searching. A moment later, she found it, a nearly invisible button. With a soft click, a hidden drawer slid open. Inside lay a small, leather-bound ledger. She opened it, her French allowing her to decipher the coded entries with sickening ease. It was all there. A meticulous record of treason, listing payments to Sir Reginald Pike and detailing the naval intelligence sold. It was enough to see them hang. She had just tucked the book into a hidden pocket of her gown when she heard footsteps in the adjoining library. Panic seized her. With no time to flee to the terrace, she darted behind a heavy tapestry depicting a grim hunting scene, pressing herself against the cold wall. Lord Blackwater entered, followed by a visibly agitated Sir Reginald Pike. "The Duke is too calm, Alaric," Pike fretted. "And his wife, the way she watches me." "You are paranoid, Reginald." Blackwater's voice was a silken poison. "The Duke is an arrogant fool who believes this business is finished. He is no longer a threat." He moved toward the decanter on his sideboard, his back to the desk. "Our next shipment is the most critical. The information it contains on Wellington's supply lines for his campaign in Spain could turn the tide for Napoleon. Once it is sent, we will have enough French gold to disappear if we must. Calm your nerves." Behind the tapestry, Paisley clutched the ledger. They had proof not only of past crimes, but of a future act of treason that could cost thousands of British lives. She waited in suffocating silence until they left to rejoin the card game, then slipped out through a servant's corridor and back into the cool night air of the gardens. Dawson was waiting on the terrace, a solitary figure watching the festivities. The tension in his shoulders eased the moment he saw her emerge from the shadows. "You have it?" he murmured as she reached him. She patted the side of her gown. "And more," she whispered, quickly relaying the conversation. "They are sending another shipment with information on Wellington's army. It leaves in a fortnight." His expression hardened into glacial fury. "Then we have no time to lose." Armed with Blackwater's own ledger and Paisley's testimony, Dawson met with the Prime Minister the very next day. The fallout was swift and silent. A week later, as Lord Blackwater and Sir Reginald Pike supervised a clandestine loading at the London docks, they were surrounded by soldiers. Their web of treason was irrevocably torn. The scandal of the traitorous Earl eclipsed all other gossip. The de Valois name was not only cleared, but celebrated. Baron de Valois, it was revealed, was a patriot whose ruin had been the price of his integrity. His honor and his fortune were restored. That evening, Paisley stood with Dawson in the quiet music room. The setting sun cast long, golden rays across the keys of her mother's pianoforte. The war was over. "My father wept today," she said softly. "He told me you had given him back his soul." "You gave it back to him, Paisley," Dawson corrected, coming to stand beside her. His presence was no longer imposing, but a source of profound comfort. "Your courage that night. You risked everything." "We both did," she replied, turning to face him. The space between them, once a formal chasm, now felt charged with unspoken emotion. "The terms of our bargain are concluded," he said, his voice husky. "Your family is secure. You are free. If you wish for an annulment, I will not stand in your way." He was giving her a choice, the one thing their arrangement had never allowed. Paisley looked into his grey eyes and saw not a duke, but the man she had come to love, a man of honor, passion, and fierce loyalty. "And where would I go?" she asked, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. "This house has started to feel like home. And this marriage of appearances," she added, stepping closer, "has started to feel remarkably real." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. "I have no interest in appearances any longer, Paisley," he whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips. "I am only interested in what is real." He kissed her then, not with the desperate public fire of the masquerade, but with a deep, tender certainty. It was a kiss of homecoming, a promise of a shared future built not on a contract, but on a love forged in conspiracy, tested by danger, and finally, blessedly, declared in the quiet of their home. The marriage of convenience was over. A true union had just begun. Wasn't that a journey? From the depths of public shame to the heights of love and vindication, Paisley and Dawson's story shows us that the most beautiful things can grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Theirs was a love born, not in a sunlit courtship, but forged in the shadows of conspiracy and sealed by a single, defiant act of passion. It reminds us that sometimes the person who seems the most distant is the one holding the shield that protects us, and that true strength isn't just enduring humiliation, but rising from it to claim your own justice and your own heart. If Paisley and Dawson's incredible story of romance, redemption, and rebellion moved you, please show your support. Click that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share this video with a friend who loves a story where love triumphs over all. And of course, if you want more tales of historical romance filled with drama and heart-stopping passion, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store. Thank you for listening.